Luke was a quiet cowboy who lived alone on a small ranch far from town. People in the area knew him as the man who spoke little, worked hard, and never caused trouble for anyone. He preferred the company of his horses and the open land instead of noisy saloons or crowded streets. Every morning he woke before sunrise, fed his animals, fixed fences, checked the water lines, and rode across the fields to make sure everything was safe. His life was simple and steady, and he liked it that way. Even though he had no family close by, he accepted his loneliness as part of his life. He had grown used to silence. One warm afternoon, Luke decided to ride out toward the canyon because the water flow there had slowed down. He thought maybe a rock slide had blocked the stream again. His horse walked steadily along the narrow path while a soft wind brushed against the dry grass. Luke enjoyed these quiet rides. They gave him time to think and breathe. But that day, something felt unusual. As he rode deeper into the canyon, he noticed faint footprints near the rocks, small, light steps not belonging to a man or a horse. He stopped and looked around carefully. At first, he saw nothing but stones, shrubs, and the tall canyon walls. But then, just as he began to move again, he spotted something near a large boulder, a piece of cloth, dark red and torn, lying on the ground. Luke climbed down from his horse and walked toward it. When he turned the cloth over with his boot, he realized it wasn't just fabric. Someone had dropped it while trying to climb or escape something. He stepped around the boulder slowly, scanning the ground. That was when he saw her. An Apache woman lay there on her side, her leg twisted at an angle, her breathing unsteady. Her long dark hair was messy, covered with dust, and her eyes were closed as if she had fainted. Luke felt his chest tighten with concern. He didn't know who she was or how she had ended up here, but he knew one thing for sure. She needed help. He knelt beside her and gently touched her shoulder. She flinched, her eyes opening slightly, filled with fear and pain. She tried to move away from him, but her injury stopped her. Luke raised his hands in a calm way, showing he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're hurt. I won't do anything to you." The woman stared at him, breathing fast. Her lips were dry, and her face looked tired, like she had been struggling for days. Luke reached into his bag and took out a small water canteen. He uncapped it and offered it to her. At first, she hesitated. She watched him with caution, unsure if she could trust him, but the dryness in her throat forced her to accept. She took small sips, her hands trembling. After a moment, she whispered her name, her voice faint and strained. "Nayeli." Luke nodded. "I'm Luke." He spoke gently, as if each word mattered. "Your leg is hurt. You can't stay here. You won't make it through the night alone." She closed her eyes briefly as another wave of pain moved through her body. Luke looked at the steep rocks around them. He knew she must have slipped while trying to climb out of the canyon. Her ankle looked swollen and bruised. She couldn't walk, not even a few steps. "I'm going to help you," Luke said. "I'll take you to my cabin. I'll treat your leg." Nayeli opened her eyes again, surprised by his offer. Their people had a long history of mistrust. She knew it could be dangerous for her to go with him, but she also knew she had no other choice. She was too weak to travel on her own. Luke carefully lifted her into his arms. She was light, but the canyon path was narrow and uneven, so he moved slowly and steadily. Nayeli kept her arms close to her chest, trying not to get in his way. She looked at him from time to time, noticing the calm in his face. He was serious, focused, and respectful. He did not touch her more than necessary, and he made sure she was comfortable. When they reached his horse, Luke helped her settle on the saddle gently. Then he mounted behind her, steadying her so she wouldn't fall. The ride back to his ranch was quiet. Nayeli leaned slightly against him because she had no strength left to sit straight. Luke did not say anything about it. He simply held the reins and guided the horse across the open land toward his home. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was lowering behind the hills, turning the sky orange and gold. Luke helped Nayeli down and carried her inside. His cabin was small but warm, with a fireplace, wooden table, a few shelves, and a clean bed in the corner. Luke laid her gently on the bed and covered her with a soft blanket. She looked around the room, noticing how simple and quiet it was, like the man who lived in it. Luke lit the fire, boiled some water, and returned with a clean cloth. He knelt beside her again, examining her ankle carefully. She watched him closely, expecting maybe a rough touch or impatience. But instead, Luke handled her injury with surprising gentleness. He used warm water to clean the dirt, then wrapped the ankle tightly but softly to keep it still. Nayeli couldn't understand why a stranger, especially a cowboy, would show her such kindness. She had grown up hearing stories that made her wary of men from nearby towns or ranches. But this man seemed different. His eyes were steady, calm, and sincere. He asked nothing from her, and he didn't question her presence. After finishing the bandage, Luke placed a cup of herbal tea beside her. "Drink this. It'll help with the pain." She nodded slowly and took the cup, warming her hands against its sides. The tea tasted bitter but comforting. Luke sat on a stool a few feet away, giving her space while still keeping an eye on her to make sure she was all right. The night grew quiet except for the soft crackling of the fire. Nayeli lay back, feeling warmth spread through her tired body. She looked at Luke again, and finally spoke softly. "You helped me? Why?" Luke looked into the fire for a long moment before answering. "Because you needed help," he said in a simple, honest way. "No one should be left alone in a place like that." Nayeli held his words in her mind. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. She closed her eyes, letting sleep take over. Before drifting off, she whispered something she didn't plan to say, something that came from her heart without fear. "I don't know why, but I feel safe here." Luke heard her, but he did not reply. He looked at her quietly, with a gentle expression that showed concern, not possession. He stood, placed another log in the fire, and allowed her to rest without interruption. Outside, the night wind moved softly across the plains. Inside the cabin, two people from different worlds shared a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them understood yet, but something neither would forget. The next morning, Luke woke before the sun, as he always did. He moved quietly around the cabin, not wanting to disturb Nayeli while she slept. She had spent the whole night resting, and for the first time since he found her, she looked peaceful. Her face, which had been tight with pain and fear the day before, now looked soft and calm. Luke watched for a moment to make sure she was breathing well, then stepped outside to feed the horses and check the ranch. The sky was still pale, and the air carried the coolness of early morning. Luke worked quickly, fixing a loose board on the corral and checking the water troughs. But even while doing his tasks, his thoughts kept returning to the woman in his cabin. He wondered how she felt today, if her ankle was better, if she felt scared being in a stranger's home. He didn't know why he cared so much, but something inside him felt protective toward her. He wanted to make sure she healed safely. When he returned to the cabin, Nayeli was awake. She tried to sit up again, but her leg still hurt. She bit her lip, trying not to show how much pain she was in. Luke walked in quietly and placed a cup of warm water with herbs beside her. "You should drink this," he said softly. "It helps with swelling." Nayeli took the cup with both hands, grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and knelt beside her ankle again. "Does it hurt more today?" "It hurts," she admitted, "but not like yesterday." Luke touched the bandage gently. She didn't flinch this time. She seemed more relaxed, more trusting. He could feel her watching him, trying to understand why he was being kind to her. A woman he didn't know and someone whose people rarely trusted his kind. Luke placed a small plate of bread and dried fruit beside her. "Eat a little. You need strength." Nayeli picked up a piece of bread slowly. She had not eaten enough for days before he found her. As she ate, she noticed how Luke made sure she had what she needed before even thinking about himself. He didn't ask where she came from, what happened to her tribe, or who she was hiding from. He gave her respect and space, something she wasn't used to receiving from strangers. After she finished, she looked at him and said quietly, "You do a lot for me." Luke shrugged lightly. "You're hurt. Anyone would do the same." Nayeli shook her head. "No, not anyone." He didn't argue. Luke was not a man who liked talking about himself or his choices. Instead, he stood and began preparing for the day. He chopped wood, filled the water basin, and swept the floor, making sure the cabin stayed clean and warm. Nayeli watched him work, noticing the calm rhythm in everything he did. He moved like someone who had lived alone for a long time and knew how to depend only on himself. But she also noticed something else. Even though Luke was quiet, there was nothing cold or distant about him. His silence felt steady, not empty. His presence filled the cabin with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. As the day continued, Luke brought a small sewing kit to her bedside. Her dress had several tears from the rocks and branches. Nayeli reached for the fabric, embarrassed that she looked so worn and tired, but Luke simply handed her the needle and thread without saying anything. "I figured you might want to fix it," he said. She nodded gratefully and began sewing. Her hands were skilled, moving smoothly, even though her ankle hurt. Luke watched her for a moment, before stepping outside to check on the animals again. When he returned, she had finished sewing the torn parts neatly. "You're good at that," he said quietly. Nayeli smiled for the first time that day. "I had to learn. We fix what we have. We don't throw things away." Luke nodded. He understood that kind of life well. The two of them settled into a quiet routine over the next few days. Nayeli stayed in the cabin, resting her ankle, while Luke worked around the ranch. Each time he came inside, he checked on her without making it obvious. He brought her fresh water, simple food, and sometimes small comforts like a warm cloth or extra blanket. Nayeli, in return, tried to help in whatever ways she could. She cleaned the table, organized small tools, and made herbal mixtures she knew from her people's traditions, placing them neatly on a shelf for him to use later. She didn't want to feel useless, even though her ankle didn't allow her to move much. During the evenings, when the work was done and the sky turned dark, they would sit by the fire. At first, they exchanged only a few words, short questions, simple answers. Luke wasn't used to talking, and Nayeli was shy with strangers. But slowly, the silence between them became warm instead of awkward. They began sharing small pieces of their lives. Luke told her about his ranch, about how he inherited the land from an uncle he barely knew. He talked about the long days, the storms he had survived, and the quiet nights that sometimes felt too quiet. Nayeli listened with gentle eyes. She understood loneliness well. When he finished, she shared her own story. She talked about being part of a small Apache group that had been moving through the land for months. She told him her family had faced hard times and that she had been separated during a storm. Her voice trembled when she spoke about it, but Luke didn't interrupt or push her for more details. He let her speak at her own pace, showing respect with his silence. As she talked, Luke realized she had experienced more hardship than she let on. She had carried heavy burdens alone, just like he had in his own way. That understanding created a quiet bond between them. something delicate, something they didn't name, but both felt growing. A few nights later, a storm rolled in. Thunder shook the cabin walls, and lightning flashed across the hills. Nayeli, already uneasy from her past, grew tense. She sat up in bed, her breathing quick and uneven. Luke noticed immediately. He stood from his chair and moved closer. "It's just thunder," he said gently. But Nayeli couldn't hide her fear. The sounds brought back memories she didn't want to remember. Storms, danger, people disappearing into the night. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She covered her face with her hands. Without saying a word, Luke sat beside her on the edge of the bed. He didn't touch her right away. He simply sat near her, letting her know she wasn't alone. After a moment, when she continued to shake, he slowly placed a blanket around her shoulders. Then, very gently, he put his arm around her so she could lean on him. Nayeli didn't resist. She leaned against him, resting her head on his chest. His steady breathing and quiet warmth made her feel grounded again. The thunder still echoed across the land, but it didn't feel as frightening with him next to her. Luke didn't speak. He didn't tell her to calm down or hide her fear. He simply stayed with her until the storm passed. When the thunder finally faded into the distance, Nayeli pulled slightly away but didn't look up. She whispered, "I'm sorry." "For what?" Luke asked softly. "For being afraid. For troubling you." "You're not troubling me," he said. "Anyone would be scared out here." She lifted her eyes to his. For the first time, she saw something in his expression she hadn't noticed before. A quiet kindness that didn't demand anything from her. Something steady and warm. That night changed something between them. They didn't speak about it the next morning, but the air felt different. The distance between them had become smaller, not because of words, but because of what they had shared in silence. Luke found himself thinking about her even when he worked outside. Nayeli found herself waiting for the sound of his boots when he came back to the cabin. They didn't call their growing bond anything. They didn't need to. It showed in their small actions, in the way Luke brought her an extra cup of tea, in the way Nayeli tried to help even when she could barely stand, in the quiet glances they exchanged when they thought the other wasn't looking. Neither of them said it out loud, but something was happening. Something soft, something real, something neither of them had expected when a cowboy found an injured Apache woman alone in a canyon. Days passed, and Nayeli's ankle healed slowly. She could walk short distances around the cabin with Luke's help, leaning on him when she felt unsteady. The mornings were bright, filled with sunlight spilling through the cabin windows, and the evenings were calm when the sky painted itself with soft pink and orange. Life settled into a quiet rhythm. But the calm could not erase the fear that lingered outside their small world. One afternoon, Luke noticed signs of movement near the edge of his land. Horses pawing the ground, the faint sound of voices carried by the wind. He recognized it immediately. Riders were searching, probably looking for Apache tracks. Nayeli's face turned pale as soon as she realized what was happening. She had tried to hide it, but Luke saw the tension in her shoulders, the sudden, sharp intake of breath. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "They might find us," she whispered. Luke put a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll be careful. Don't worry." But Nayeli's worry was real, and her fear of putting Luke in danger made her heart race. She had grown to trust him in the days they had shared, but now that trust came with a heavy weight. She couldn't let him suffer because of her. She wanted to run, to disappear into the hills before the riders arrived. Her mind imagined all the ways he could be blamed, all the ways their quiet life could be destroyed. She felt helpless and trapped. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of wind against the walls made her flinch. She finally got up quietly and walked to Luke, who was sitting by the fire sharpening a tool. She stood behind him, her small frame tense. Luke, I think I should leave, she said softly, her voice breaking. I can't stay here. You might get into trouble because of me. Luke didn't look up at first. He continued sharpening the tool, slow and steady, as if the weight of her words had not shaken him. Then finally, he set the tool aside and turned to face her. His eyes were calm, filled with a quiet determination. Nayeli, I won't let you go. You're not a problem. You're someone I care about. I won't let anything happen to you, not while I'm here. Nayeli shook her head. I don't want you to risk yourself for me. You don't know what they'll do if they find me here. They might hurt you, Luke. I can't let that happen. Luke stepped closer, closing the distance between them. He placed his hands gently on her arms, looking into her eyes. I've been alone a long time. I've never had someone to worry about, someone I wanted to protect. I won't turn away now. Not from you. Nayeli felt her heart tighten. His words were strong, but they were also comforting. She realized that despite the fear gnawing at her, she couldn't deny what had grown inside her over these days. She cared for him too, more than she wanted to admit. She took a shaky breath, tears welling in her eyes. Luke, I don't know what I would do without you. I can't imagine being anywhere else. I'm afraid I might lose you if I leave. Luke's eyes softened. He lifted a hand to brush a strand of hair from her face. You're not going anywhere. You're not alone anymore. You belong here, with me. We'll face whatever comes together. Nayeli's lips trembled. She had never felt this kind of safety before, not in her own family, not in her group. But here, with him, she felt strong, cared for, and understood. Her tears began to fall freely, and she clung to him, her face pressing into his chest. Luke wrapped his arms around her, holding her gently but firmly. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The warmth of his body, the steady heartbeat, and the quiet assurance in his embrace spoke louder than words ever could. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them grew deeper. They spent the days working together, Luke tending to the ranch, Nayeli helping as much as her strength allowed. She learned small tasks like feeding the animals, arranging the cabin, and tending to the fire. Luke showed her how to mend fences, gather water, and care for the horses. In return, Nayeli shared small bits of her knowledge, how to use herbs for minor aches, how to recognize signs of approaching weather, and even small ways to track wildlife. They learned from each other, each day bringing them closer. Yet the fear never completely left Nayeli. Whenever she saw dust rising on the horizon or heard distant voices, her body tensed. Luke noticed this and made sure to remain calm, reassuring her with simple gestures, a hand on her back, a gentle touch to her arm, a quiet word of comfort. He never forced her to speak or confront her fears. Instead, he let her feel safe at her own pace, and gradually, the fear began to lessen, replaced by trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Nayeli sat on a small stool near the fire while Luke repaired a broken harness. She watched him, feeling a mixture of admiration and longing. The firelight danced across his strong hands and focused expression. She realized she had never seen someone so steadfast, so dependable, someone she could truly rely on. Her chest tightened with emotion she couldn't yet name. Luke glanced up from his work and noticed her watching him. He smiled faintly. "You've been quiet today," he said. Nayeli looked down, cheeks warming. I'm just thinking," she murmured. "About what?" he asked gently, putting the harness down and walking closer. She hesitated, unsure if she should speak her thoughts aloud. "About everything. About being here. About you. About me being afraid of losing you." Luke's expression softened. He knelt beside her, reaching out to hold her hands. "Nayeli, look at me," he said. She raised her eyes, meeting his. "You don't have to be afraid. I'm not going anywhere. You're safe with me. I promise." Her chest tightened with emotion, and tears slid down her cheeks. I don't know how I can live without you now," she whispered. Her voice was fragile but filled with raw honesty. She had never admitted anything like this to anyone before. She had kept her feelings hidden, buried under fear and survival. But in this moment, she could not hold them back. Luke held her closer, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then don't," he said softly. "You don't have to live without me. You're mine now, Nayeli, and I'll make sure you're never alone again." She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of doubt or trickery, but found none. Only the truth, steady, strong, and unwavering. Her heart swelled with relief, gratitude, and something deeper, something that frightened her with its intensity. She had never imagined she could feel this way about anyone, yet here it was. She wanted to stay, to trust completely, to belong. Luke brushed the tears from her cheeks. "You're not just safe," he said. "You're part of this ranch, part of my life. We'll face whatever comes together. I won't let anything take you away from me." For the first time since she had been injured and lost, Nayeli felt a true sense of peace. She leaned into him, closing her eyes, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart, and the certainty in his words. It was a feeling she had longed for without even knowing it, a safe place to rest, to trust, to belong. The night passed quietly, the wind outside whispering against the cabin walls. Nayeli slept peacefully in Luke's arms, and for the first time in her life she didn't dream of running, of being alone, of being lost. She dreamed instead of a life where she could stay, where she could trust, and where she belonged. Luke stayed awake a little longer, watching the fire, thinking about the future, about the promise he had made, and feeling a quiet joy that this brave, strong woman had trusted him enough to let him care for her. From that night onward, their bond became stronger. They spoke more freely, laughed quietly, and shared small joys and tasks. They began to understand each other in ways words could not capture. The fear that once hovered at the edge of their days had not disappeared completely, but it was tempered by trust and love. Each glance, each touch, each shared silence reinforced their connection. Nayeli had realized something important. She didn't want to imagine life without Luke. And Luke, too, had realized he didn't want to imagine a day without her presence, her quiet strength, and the warmth she brought into his life. Together, they were no longer just two people surviving. Together, they were a team, a bond that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The days after that storm were calm and quiet, but the quiet brought a new awareness to both Luke and Nayeli. They had grown closer than either expected, and the bond between them had deepened into something neither could ignore. Nayeli could walk longer distances now, though Luke always stayed near to help if she stumbled. She had learned to trust him completely, and in return Luke had grown protective and devoted, knowing she was now a part of his life in a way he never thought possible. One morning, as sunlight poured through the cabin window, Nayeli stood by the door, stretching her legs after a light walk. Luke brought in a bucket of fresh water for the animals and set it down outside. When he turned, he saw her watching him quietly, a small smile on her lips. It was a simple moment, but Luke felt warmth in his chest he could not explain. He walked over and handed her a small cloth to wipe the sweat from her brow. Their hands brushed lightly, and for a moment neither moved. The air felt charged, full of unspoken words and feelings they both understood without speaking. As the day went on, they worked together around the ranch. Luke fixed fences, tended to the horses, and repaired the barn roof, while Nayeli helped gather hay, arranged the tools, and checked on the animals. Even in work, they found ways to communicate silently. A glance, a nod, a gentle smile. Their bond was stronger than any words could express. Nayeli had never imagined such companionship before, and Luke realized how much he needed her presence, her soft voice, and her quiet strength to make his life complete. But the peaceful routine was soon threatened. One afternoon, distant voices and the sound of horses reached their ears. Luke stiffened, recognizing the signs of riders approaching the ranch. Nayeli froze, her heart racing. She feared for both their safety, knowing the group could question her presence and put Luke at risk. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to disappear into the hills, to protect him from danger. But she could not bring herself to go without telling him. Luke noticed the tension immediately. He took her hand gently. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "We'll handle this together." Her eyes widened, filled with fear and uncertainty. "Luke, I can't let you get hurt because of me. You don't understand what they'll do if they find me here. They might—" "They won't," Luke interrupted firmly but gently. "I've lived long enough to know who I am and what I stand for. I won't let anything happen to you. You belong here, Nayeli. With me. I will protect you, no matter what." Her chest heaved with emotion, tears filling her eyes. She realized then how deep her feelings for him had grown, stronger than fear, stronger than caution. She clung to him, pressing her forehead to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the warmth of his body. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, a sense of safety and belonging that went beyond words. The riders came closer that evening, riding slowly along the perimeter of the ranch, but Luke stayed calm. He moved with confidence, showing no fear, while Nayeli stayed close, trusting him completely. The riders checked the area, but seeing no one outside the cabin, they rode on, leaving the ranch undisturbed. Nayeli breathed a sigh of relief, hugging Luke tightly. She realized he had risked himself for her and would do so again if necessary. That night, after the danger had passed, they sat by the fire. The warm glow of the flames reflected in their eyes as they looked at each other. Nayeli broke the silence first. "Luke, I can't live without you now," she whispered. I don't want to imagine a life without you. You've given me safety, kindness, and something I've never felt before. I love you." Luke's expression softened. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "And I love you, Nayeli. You're mine now. I promise you, you'll never be alone again. We'll face everything together, and I will protect you, always." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his embrace. Luke wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, and for a long time, they sat silently, letting the fire and the quiet night fill the space around them. The next days were filled with preparations. Luke knew they couldn't stay completely exposed in case the riders returned. He strengthened the fences, dug small hidden paths, and made sure supplies were ready for travel if necessary. Nayeli helped, learning quickly how to move quietly and assist in practical ways. Together, they became a team, working, planning, and protecting each other. One morning, Luke decided it was time to move. "We can't stay here forever," he said. "We need to go somewhere safe, where no one will follow, where you can live freely without fear." Nayeli nodded. She trusted him completely, knowing he had never let her down. She felt a mix of fear and excitement, but mostly relief. For the first time in years, she felt hope that she could have a life where she was safe, cared for, and loved. They packed what they could carry: food, water, blankets, and some tools. Luke helped Nayeli onto her horse, making sure she was comfortable and steady. Then he mounted his own horse beside her. The morning sun rose behind them as they rode away from the cabin, leaving behind the familiar hills and entering the open land beyond. Their path was unknown, but they faced it together, side by side. As they traveled, they talked about the future. Nayeli shared her dreams of seeing more of the land, learning more about the world outside her small group, and living a life where she could make her own choices. Luke listened patiently, encouraging her, offering guidance without dominating her decisions. He shared his own thoughts as well, dreams of a life not just of survival, but of happiness, companionship, and family. Together, they imagined a life where trust and love were the foundations. At night, they camped under the open sky, wrapped in blankets by a small fire. Nayeli rested against Luke, feeling safe in his arms. The stars above them were bright, and the silence of the night felt like a blanket itself, protecting them from the dangers of the world. She thought about the journey they had been on, the fear, the pain, the quiet days in the cabin, and now the beginning of a life together. She realized that every step had brought them closer, and now she could finally embrace the happiness she had never thought possible. Luke held her hand and whispered softly, "No matter what happens, we'll face it together. You're mine forever, Nayeli." She smiled through her tears, leaning closer. "And you're mine too, Luke. I've never felt this way before, but I know it's true." In the days that followed, they encountered small challenges: a river that had to be crossed, rocky hills to climb, and nights that grew cold. But none of these challenges mattered as much as the bond they shared. Each obstacle strengthened their trust, their dependence on each other, and their understanding of what it meant to care for someone completely. Eventually, they reached a place that felt right, a quiet valley, far from roads, far from towns, where they could settle and live in peace. Luke helped Nayeli down from her horse, and together they explored the land, imagining a home where both could live freely. They found a small cabin abandoned long ago, which Luke decided they could repair. Over the next days, they worked side by side, rebuilding it, adding small touches, making it theirs. It became more than a cabin. It became a home. As the sun set on the first evening in their new home, they sat outside, holding hands, watching the sky turn gold and pink. Nayeli leaned against Luke, feeling warmth, love, and a sense of belonging she had never known before. Luke wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. "I promise you, Nayeli," he said softly, "from now on, you'll never have to fear anything. You'll never be alone. You're mine forever, and I'm yours." Nayeli smiled, resting her head against him. "And I promise the same, Luke. I can't imagine life without you now." The night grew quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of the valley, the rustling leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the gentle beating of two hearts that had found each other in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. In that quiet, they felt a joy deeper than anything they had known, a joy of safety, trust, love, and a future they would build together. The cowboy and the Apache woman had found each other, and their promise bound their lives forever. From that day forward, they lived side by side, caring for each other, sharing simple joys, facing challenges together, and building a life where love and trust reigned. No one could separate them. Their bond, tested by fear and hardship, had become unbreakable. And every day as the sun rose over the valley, Nayeli would smile at Luke, and Luke would smile back, knowing that the promise they had made, the promise to never leave each other, was the strongest truth in their lives.